Hello students. So let's continue with the second lesson, Tommy's Missing Dollar by Louisa May Alcott. Let's take a look at what are the things that we'll be studying in this video. First, we will begin with the revision of what we had studied earlier. Then I'll read out the new content and explain it to you. We will discuss the value that we learned from this lesson. We'll take a look at the vocabulary words, followed by the summary of the story and homework. So now let's take a quick recap of what we had studied earlier. Do you remember the characters of the story? The professor, Mr. Bear. Some of the students of the school, Tommy, Nat, Franz, Dan, Jimmy, and Jack. And the neighbor, Mrs. Bates. So we had studied a new student, Nat Blake, arrives at Professor Bear's Plumfield Estate School. He is shy and has a talent for a fiddle. Another student of the school, Tommy, sells eggs and makes money. He spends money recklessly. Mr. Bear wants to teach Tommy to save money, so he gives him a private bank in the shape of a building. Mr. Bear tells Tommy that he cannot break the bank unless he has collected $5 and that he should spend the money wisely. Tommy had collected $4 in the bank, and the day he earns $1 by selling 4 dozen eggs to Mrs. Bear, he runs off to the barn to show Nat his forequarters. While Tommy and Nat were in the barn, someone called out to them to come and look at the snake that Dan had caught near the brook. In the excitement to look at the snake, Tommy left the quarters on the winnowing machine and ran off with Nat towards the brook. He completely forgot about his money until bedtime. Tommy decided to leave it there as only Nat knew where it was kept. The next morning, Tommy found the dollar missing. Tommy rushed to his school and asked all the boys about his missing dollar. Everyone denied knowing anything about the dollar. Tommy told Mr. Bear about what had happened. Mr. Bear questioned the boys about the missing dollar. All the boys told Mr. Bear that they knew nothing about it. Even Nat told Mr. Bear that he did not take the money. Mr. Bear told Nat that the evidence were against him, and because of his old habit of lying, it made it difficult for everyone to trust Nat. So now that you are caught up with all that we studied previously, let's continue with the new content and see what happens next. I am reading the text from page number 13. Last paragraph. One day, while hunting for eggs, Tommy asked Billy for a bit of chalk to mark the eggs. Billy mounted a stool and looked where Tommy kept his writing materials. "There's a lot of money in here," said Billy. Tommy hopped up to see what Billy was talking about, but nearly tumbled down again, for he was greatly surprised to see 4 bright quarters on a piece of paper with Tom Banks written on it. Grabbing them, Tommy dashed into the house, crying wildly, "It's all right! Got my money! Where's Nat?" Nat was soon found, and his surprise and pleasure was so genuine that few doubted his words when he denied all knowledge of the money. Mr. Bear was very glad to hear the news and waited for further revelations. They came sooner than he expected. As they sat at supper that night, a square parcel was handed over to Mr. Bear. Mrs. Bates, a neighbor, had sent it. A note accompanied it, and while Mr. Bear read it, Demi pulled off the wrapper, exclaiming, "Why, it's the book Uncle Teddy gave Dan." Mr. Bear looked up and said, "The note is from Mrs. Bates, and she says that Dan had sold the book to her son, Jimmy, last Saturday for $1. She saw that it was worth much more than $1, and thinking there was some mistake, has sent it to me. Did you sell it, Dan?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Wanted money." "For what?" "To pay Tommy." "He never borrowed any money from me in his life," cried Tommy, looking very surprised. "I must have this settled right away. Did you put the dollar in the barn this morning?" asked Mr. Bear. Dan looked him straight in the face and answered steadily, "Yes, I did, but I won't say another word about it. Not even that you're sorry? Asked Mr. Bear, troubled by the change in Dan. I am not sorry, said Dan, before hurrying out of the room. When Mr. Bear came into school the next morning, he looked very happy and relieved. He went to Dan and taking him by both hands, said, I know all about it now, but it's never right to tell lies, even for a friend. What is it? Cried Nat. Dan did not take Tommy's money, said Mr. Bear. Who did? Cried the boys in a chorus. Mr. Bear pointed to one empty seat, and every eye followed his finger. Jack went home early this morning, but he left this note behind him. I took Tommy's dollar. I was peeking in through a crack and saw him put it there. I was afraid to tell before, though I wanted to. I didn't care so much about Nat, but Dan is a gem of a person, and I can't stand it any longer. I never spend the money. It's under the carpet in my room, right behind the washstand. I'm very sorry. I am going home and don't think I shall ever come back, so Dan may have my things. Jack. Though it was a kind lie, Dan, and I can't help forgiving you, you see, it did no good, said Mr. Bear with a face full of relief and affection. It kept the boys from plaguing Nat. That's why I did it, explained Dan, as if glad to speak out after his hard silence. Now let us understand the text. One day, Tommy and Billy were in the barn. Tommy was hunting for eggs. He asked Billy for a piece of chalk to mark the eggs. Billy quickly took one stool, climbed up on it, and he looked for a chalk piece in the place where Tommy kept his writing materials. Billy was surprised to see some money kept there, and he quickly told Tommy about it. Tommy became very excited and he hopped to see what Billy was talking about. While hopping, he tumbled down. Tumble down means fell down. He was so surprised to see 4 quarters kept there with a piece of paper and his name written on it. He grabbed the money and he went announcing in the house that he found his money. Mr. Bear was very glad to hear the news and he waited for further revelations. Revelations mean surprising or previously unknown facts that had been made known to others. Then, as they were having supper at night, a square parcel was handed over to Mr. Bear. That square parcel was given by Mrs. Bates, a neighbor. Along with the parcel there was a note that accompanied it. Demi at once pulled off the wrapper to see what was inside the parcel. Demi recognized the book and at once stated that this was the same book that was given by Uncle Teddy to Dan. Mr. Bear told them that the note was from Mrs. Bates, a neighbor, and she wrote to him and said that Dan sold this book to her son last Saturday for $1. She is returning this book because she thinks there must be some mistake, as the book looks worth more than $1. Now Mr. Bear began to ask questions to Dan. Dan was talking in bits and phrases and not telling anything clearly. Dan revealed that he sold the book because he wanted to return the money to Tommy. Tommy broke out in surprise and said that Dan never took any money from him. So what is this money that he wants to return? Then Mr. Bear asked Dan if he had kept that money in the barn that morning. Dan looked at him and said yes. Now everyone started to think that it was Dan who had robbed the money from the winnowing machine. And now he was trying to return the money back to Tommy by keeping it in the barn. Mr. Bear asked Dan if he wouldn't even say sorry to Tommy for doing this. Dan said that he was not sorry and he ran away from the room. Mr. Bear was very confused with this changed behavior of Dan and was wondering what was happening, and so was everybody. The next day, when Mr. Bear came to class, he looked happy and relieved. He went to Dan, held his hands, and told him that it is never right to tell lies even for a friend. Nat inquired what Mr. Bear was talking about, as Dan was his friend. Mr. Bear told him that Dan did not take Tommy's money. The boys looked puzzled, and everyone asked who had taken the money then. Mr. Bear pointed out to one empty seat. It was Jack who had stolen the money, and he left early in the morning, leaving a note behind. In the note, Jack revealed Jack was peeking in through a crack. That means he was secretly looking inside the barn through a small gap. He saw Tommy keeping the quarters on the winnowing machine. And when Tommy and Nat ran off to see the snake, Jack went inside and robbed the money. Until Nat was being blamed for the theft, Jack did not bother about him. But then when he saw Dan getting involved in this, he couldn't take it anymore and he decided to let out the secret. In the end, Mr. Bear told Dan that even a kind lie did no good for him because he tried to lie. How he tried to lie? He tried to sell a book and he tried to replace the money in the barn. But by doing so, what happened? The blame was coming on Dan. But the question arises, why did Dan want to lie? Because he wanted to save Nat from being accused. He felt very bad about his friend Nat. You remember that line where they said that Dan watched over him protectively? So Dan only did this because he wanted to save his friend Nat from being accused. So the value that we learn from this lesson is, we should never accuse someone of a wrongdoing till we can prove it. There is also a phrase, giving someone the benefit of the doubt. This means that a person is good or correct if they are not proven otherwise. And here is a vocabulary chart. Take a look at it. We have the word, meaning, synonyms and antonyms. You should learn this chart to improve your vocabulary. Now it is time to sum up everything that we have studied today. Tommy is very happy the day he gets $1 from Mrs. Bear, as then his savings would add up to $5 and he would be able to break his savings bank and use the money. He rushes to the barn to display the bright quarters to Nat. Suddenly a voice calls them to see a snake that Dan had caught. Putting the money in an old winnowing machine, Tommy runs out followed by Nat. Tommy forgets about the money and does not remember it till he was in his bed that night. He decides to get it the next morning as only Nat knew about it. The next morning, as the boys assemble for school, Tommy rushes in and asks if anyone had taken his money. Everyone denies any knowledge of it and begin to look suspiciously at Nat. Just then, Mr. Bear walks in. Tommy tells him about his lost daughter. Mr. Bear asks the boys to settle down. Mr. Bear asks the same question to each one and receives the same answer. Finally, when he comes to Nat, he tells him that the evidence is against him and Nat's old habit of lying makes it difficult for him to trust Nat. But he clarifies that he does not charge Nat with theft and will not punish him until he is completely sure about it. Nat is miserable by the cold looks and general suspicion that he feels around him. He suffers for a week as no one talks to him except Dan. Then, one day, when Tommy asks Billy for a bit of chalk to mark the eggs, Billy sees 4 bright quarters on a piece of paper with Tom Banks written on it. Tommy grabs them and runs into the house announcing that he has found his money. That night at supper, Mr. Bear receives a parcel from Mrs. Bates, a neighbor. In a letter, she explains that Dan had sold a book to her son Jimmy for $1. Dan admits that he had sold the book to pay Tommy. He also admitted to having put the $1 in the barn. The next morning, Mr. Bear comes into school looking very happy and relieved. He reveals that Jack had written a letter to confess that he had taken the money. When Mr. Bear tells Dan that though it was a kind lie, it did no good, Dan says that he did it to keep the boys from plaguing Nat. Now the next slide contains your homework. Take a look at it and complete it sincerely.